They say empires crumble by the sword, but sometimes they rot from within the sheets. Back in 38 CE, when Rome's power seemed untouchable, a young bride stepped through the gleaming marble halls of the Palatine Palace. Her name was Valeria Messalina, just 15 years old, chosen to wed Emperor Claudius, a man twice her age, frail in body but wrapped in the weight of absolute power. To the people of Rome, the marriage sounded like a promise for renewal. A noble-born empress, youthful and fertile, meant to embody virtue, raise heirs, and steady an empire still haunted by Caligula's madness. Yet beneath the garlands and golden vows of that wedding day, another story had already begun. A darker one that would make her name echo through history as Rome's most infamous empress. At first, Messalina seemed the perfect Roman wife. The ancient writers describe her as the kind of beauty the city adored: fair skin, golden hair, and that aristocratic grace that made her look more divine than mortal. She fulfilled her early duties without flaw, bearing Claudius 2 children and presenting herself at public ceremonies with quiet dignity. Under the rigid moral code of Roman life, where women were divided into the matrona, the virtuous wife, and the meretrix, the prostitute, she was expected to incarnate chastity. What if the very gulf between what Rome demanded from her and what she secretly desired became the engine of her ruin? Did you know many claimed that Messalina slipped out of the palace at night disguised as a prostitute, working in a brothel in the Subura district? Tacitus relates that she pitted herself against Rome's lowest courtesans, determined to prove she could take more clients than any of them. Picture the shock of a senator stumbling into such a den only to recognize the empress beneath grease paint and cheap perfume. It wasn't despair that drove her. It was the thrill, the rebellion, the intoxicating power of using her own body to mock the society that worshipped her innocence. Those midnight escapades were just the beginning. Inside the palace, Messalina turned Claudius's court into a stage for her desires. Picture the feasts: couches covered in silk, golden dishes stacked with roasted dormice, figs dripping with honey, wine spilling from jeweled cups. Senators reclined in uneasy silence while she ruled the room, not as a dutiful hostess but as a ringmaster, summoning gladiators fresh from the arena, foreign captives, and even the children of Rome's nobility to take part in her twisted entertainments. One whisper claimed she once challenged Rome's most famous courtesan, Sylla, to a contest, to see who could outlast the other. By dawn, Sylla collapsed after 25 men. Messalina kept going, surpassing 30. Her victory met not with cheers but with stunned, sickened silence. Why did she do it? Was it pure lust without limit or something colder, a deliberate game of power and humiliation? Her reach stretched across every rank. Generals bent to her will, noblewomen blackmailed into shame, senators' sons forced into her revels. Refusing her wasn't just risky, it was fatal. Those who turned her down didn't live long. One tribune was found floating in the Tiber. A senator lost his title overnight. The message couldn't have been clearer. Rome's empress tolerated no defiance, not even from the gods. She staged parodies of sacred rites, mock ceremonies to Venus and Bacchus, where she would begin in priestly robes only to tear them away, ordering her guests to perform obscene acts in the gods' names. For Romans, religion was the spine of the empire holding everything together. By desecrating it, she made her own claim to divinity, goddess not of love, but of domination. And the toll it took on Roman families was devastating. Picture a senator's wife, shamed before her peers, walking home in silence. A daughter dragged from her father's estate, returning days later with eyes that couldn't meet his. As for Claudius, history still argues whether he was blind, cowardly, or simply complicit. Whatever the truth, he did nothing. And so the legend grew. Messalina's name spread across the provinces, not as a symbol of grace but as a curse. Yet Rome went on as if nothing had happened. Markets still bustled, soldiers still marched, and the races thundered through the Circus Maximus. The empire's marble surface gleamed bright as ever, but behind those walls, its moral heart was already beginning to rot. Every whisper about Messalina chipped away at the Senate's authority. Every scandal eroded the people's faith in the emperor's house. Rome had once taken pride in its discipline, its sense of order and virtue. Yet now it watched its highest lady turn indulgence into a form of governance. The ruins on the Palatine still stand today, faded frescoes, cracked columns, but if you walk among them, you can almost feel her shadow still clinging to the stones. She began as a girl bride and became the most feared courtesan of her age. Her story leaves behind a question that still sends a chill down the spine. What happens when the person chosen to represent purity decides instead to wear corruption as a crown? In Rome, power wasn't just written into laws or chiseled into marble. It lived in whispers behind curtains, in the scent of wine at banquets, and in Messalina's case, in the dangerous allure of her own body. As the years of her reign slipped by, her hunger didn't fade. It deepened. What started as reckless midnight adventures grew into something calculated and cold, a machine of corruption that pulled the most powerful men and women in Rome into a web of shame. The old historians, Tacitus, Suetonius, Juvenal, each with his own brand of venom, tell us that Messalina went so far as to create what could only be called an imperial brothel, hidden in plain sight inside a grand villa near the Campus Martius. But this wasn't a den for base pleasure. It was an operation built on precision and manipulation. Noble women were dragged into service under threat of ruin, forced to play their parts beside her. Men of rank, senators, generals, wealthy merchants, were lured there under false pretenses, only to find themselves trapped in humiliation so deep it guaranteed their silence. Her attendants kept careful record of every confession, every secret muttered in the fog of disgrace. Later, that knowledge became her real weapon. She didn't need an army to control Rome. She had blackmail. Families paid fortunes, officials surrendered positions, and governors bent the knee, all to keep their shame buried. The small, private scenes from her reign still make the blood run cold. Picture a young noblewoman torn from her father's atrium, forced to act the courtesan while Messalina looked on, expression unreadable. Imagine senators stripped of their togas, made to perform degrading acts before rivals who would later exploit their humiliation. One soldier who managed to escape that villa once confessed that battle was mercy by comparison. Blood dries, he said, but shame never does. That was the essence of Messalina's power. She had discovered that humiliation could shatter a man more completely than any sword. Her cruelty was always dressed in spectacle. By the early 40s CE, her gatherings had become infamous. They masqueraded as pious celebrations of Venus or Bacchus, beginning with incense and ritual, before dissolving into frenzied orgies where Rome's elite acted out sins they would never dare admit. Messalina conducted it all like a maestro directing a macabre symphony. Senators were paired with their enemies, generals forced into grotesque competitions. Noble wives were unveiled before sneering circles of the powerful. Refusing her meant destruction. Obeying her meant disgrace. No one left those nights untouched, each guest bound not by loyalty, but by mutual shame. The stories that followed weren't just tales of excess. They were testaments to obsession. Among them, none echoed louder than the infamous contest with Sylla, Rome's celebrated courtesan. Long after it happened, that night was whispered about not for its scandal, but for what it revealed of Messalina herself. She had turned desire into a weapon, treating lust like a contest of endurance and domination. What others saw as depravity, she saw as victory. For her, pleasure wasn't the goal, it was the stage on which power was proven. Imagine the shock across Rome. Senators trading rumors behind closed doors, noblewomen whispering her name like a curse. The Empress of Rome, wife to the Emperor, had turned her own shame into a spectacle of triumph. Why would a woman raised in privilege, adored for her beauty, and crowned with power seek her glory in humiliation? Historians have argued for centuries. Some claim it was unrestrained desire. Others believe it was the intoxication of control. A few point to the loneliness of being married too young to a man twice her age, an emperor more scholar than lover. But maybe the truth was simpler and more terrifying. For Messalina, the thrill lived in contradiction. The more Rome demanded her purity, the more irresistible it became to defile it. And her empire of lust had a cost. The Senate, already crumbling, found itself paralyzed by fear. Governors were no longer chosen for merit but for silence. The machinery of Rome still turned, but it ran on corruption, greased with shame. The generals no longer stood by Claudius out of honor. They stayed loyal because they feared what Messalina might reveal. Under her hidden influence, Roman policy twisted into something unrecognizable. Foreign ambassadors whispered of strange negotiations where senators sat silent, their confidence stripped away, their eyes hollow. It was as if the entire empire was being ruled by one woman's obsession. But decadence always breeds enemies. The soldiers, long numb to imperial excess, began to grumble. Whispers spread through the camps that some of their own had been summoned to Messalina's villa, humiliated before her guests, made to perform in ways no soldier could bear to recall. For men hardened by battle, shame cut deeper than any wound. The barracks filled with muttered curses that anywhere else would have been treason. Her paranoia began to eat her alive. Guards were doubled, punishments sharpened. The spectacles grew crueler. Every new outrage meant to drown out rebellion in fear. But each act only cracked the illusion further. Rome had survived fire, plague, invasion, everything the world could throw at it. The question was whether it could survive an empress who ruled through degradation. The breaking point came in 48 CE, with an act so outrageous that even now, historians can hardly believe it. While Claudius was away in Ostia, Messalina held a wedding. Not a secret tryst, but a full Roman ceremony, to her lover, the senator Gaius Silius. Priests were present. Witnesses signed the contracts. Every ritual and legal form was followed to the letter. On paper, she was now married to Silius, while still empress and wife of Claudius. It wasn't scandal, it was open rebellion. She had stepped into daylight, turning her lust into treason. What could have driven her to such madness? Did she really believe Claudius would accept it? That the Senate would bow? That Rome itself would tolerate an empress with two husbands? Or was it compulsion, the kind that pushes you to destroy everything just to feel alive? Whatever the reason, that wedding sealed her fate. When word reached Claudius, he laughed at first, dismissing it as another ridiculous rumor. But as proof piled up, the laughter turned to rage. The cuckolded emperor finally acted. With soldiers at his back, Claudius rode for Rome. Messalina was found in the gardens of the palace. She had ruled like a goddess of vice. The old chroniclers describe her end with cruel precision. She begged for her life, even offered up her children to buy mercy. When none came, she tried to take her own life, but couldn't finish. A soldier stepped forward and drove the blade home. And just like that, the woman who had enslaved Rome through shame died not in glory, but in panic and blood. Her punishment didn't end there. Claudius ordered her statues destroyed, her name chiseled off every inscription, her memory officially erased. Damnatio memoriae. But Rome could never truly forget. The harder they tried to bury her, the louder her legend grew. Even now, when you stand among the ruins on the Palatine, the silence feels heavy. Tourists may admire the mosaics and marble, but the stones still whisper of her. The brothel, the revels, the blackmail, the forbidden wedding. Messalina's story survived because it refused to stay buried. In the end, her tale stands as a warning that crosses centuries. Empires don't always fall to swords or invading armies. They can rot from within, poisoned by their own excess. Messalina proved that lust can destroy as surely as steel, and that shame can enslave a man more tightly than chains. History closes her chapter with a grim truth. Rome's deadliest weapon wasn't forged in iron. It wore a crown and called itself Empress.